everyone, and welcome back to Keys. Today we will be discussing the importance of empathy. Empathy helps us understand people, and this is more important than ever in these strange days, the twitchy 20s, where we're all faced with surprise, uncertainty, and lots of question marks from many countries and many businesses. So with our experts from around Ipsos, we will be exploring how empathy can take us out of our world and into the world of another person, and go from just observation to transformational insight. On the agenda, we will be taking the temperature with Simon in London, reflecting on the latest public opinion research and the real worlds that people are living in. We will also have a special focus on our annual Earth Day survey. Then April in New York will tell us about empathy and action, and how empathy and action together are a force for change and for better business results. We will then go back to London with Gillian on how empathy elevates brand success, how brand managers, marketeers, and communicators can use empathy to truly connect with individuals in those moments that really matter. And at last, we will talk about creative effectiveness. And that will be with Geraldine, who is joining us from Barcelona, and Arnaud in Geneva. And they will share new evidence on how the blend of creativity and empathy is a great recipe for successful advertising campaigns. And with that, I will hand over to Simon.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everybody for being with us today. And just to say also, if you have any questions for the panelists, we've got a bit of time at the end to have a discussion and a conversation on some of the themes we'll be talking about today. As Jennifer said, we're living through the twitchy 20s, and it does make it a bit of a challenge for those of us perhaps trying to summarize or generalize about how people feel. So if I'm trying to take the temperature of people around the world, I think my theme for this month is that we have to be very, very careful about how much we know about even today's current dynamic. I'm going to share with you our latest consumer confidence index. Now, on one level, this is a very robust measure. It's going back 13 years. We're in 29 countries, really trying each month to take the temperature and to find out how people are feeling. And the most recent release that came out this month gives us a slightly more careful summary. Consumer confidence going in opposite directions among the world's largest economies. Japan, Germany, and Canada, it's on the up. France, not so much. And a reminder really that it really have to be careful about making those overarching summaries of things, and a reminder that quite often we need to take a step back. And in this context, we're finding taking a step back to get that 12-month view gives us a bit more of a horizon, a bit more of a panorama to look at. And we can start to see which countries, for example, show the greatest negative change in terms of consumer confidence. And Sweden is the most marked one in that context. And when I look at Sweden, again, a reminder that we have to be careful about going to quick conclusions from a quick look, because a small internet search finds me that Sweden is defying forecasts, and actually its GDP gain has gone up. But a slightly more detailed look reminds me that that's only for 1 month. The same month, by the way, in March, I have another article really pointing to some of the dynamics facing Sweden today around housing, around interest rates, and around how people in their daily lives are feeling under pressure. And that helps to explain why the results for Sweden have fallen so much over the last year in terms of how people in Sweden feel about their economy. Similarly, if I look at the largest gains over the month just gone, or sorry, the year just gone, Brazil and Turkey are the two which show the biggest gains, but they're in very different places. And yet again, a reminder that we need to be very clear about the context of each country and about the absolute dynamic that they're in. So Turkey, although sentiment is on the up, it is still one of the more pessimistic countries. Brazil is more at the top end of the spectrum, and so really underlines for us how difficult it can be to make summaries about what's happening right now. And at the Ipsos office, we found the work by The Economist actually quite useful in the last couple of weeks to help us reflect on this, because in their analysis of how to explain the puzzle of the world economy, they welcome us to the Mona Lisa effect, as they call it. And they say that each time, just as when we're looking at the Mona Lisa, we look at it, we see something different, and just underlines for us the challenges we have in making the use of all the data sources available, but as we'll show on the webinar, that we stay close to the reality of people's real lives. And what we're doing now is looking at what worries the world. We hope this stays close to people's real lives, because we ask people what's the most worrying things in your country. Inflation remains front and center for the 13th month. The concerns do not go away. But according to the public, concerns about the pandemic have gone away. It's now 17th out of 18th on our list of issues. It's the lowest number mentioning it since we added it to the survey 3 years ago. And this month, because it's been Earth Day, we thought we would look a little bit at climate change. Now, a big finding there that we all need to be aware of is it's only a middle ranking order. We have some countries who are relatively more likely to highlight climate change as one of the big issues facing their country, but these tend to be some of the more wealthy countries. When we're taking an international view, for many countries it isn't registering as one of the top flashing lights in terms of how people think about their issues and the challenges that they face in their lives. Now, because it was Earth Day, we've taken our annual deep dive into climate change, again doing an international study. And again, we have, I think, a marker in terms of the headline, because the headline, it raises the question about whether concern and focus is slipping when it comes to climate change. So yes, all is not lost, in the sense that people do understand that action needs to be taken. If everybody made some small changes in their everyday lives, it could have a big impact. It may not be an overwhelming consensus, but it's getting that way when we look at the international dynamic. And similarly, when we ask people about whether they think their country should do more, the answer is, broadly speaking, yes, we must. But the big thing we're finding this month is when we ask this question here about if we as individuals, or we as our businesses, or if we as our government do not act now, we'll be failing future generations, we're seeing just a little bit of a decline in the level of urgency as other topics, the twitchy 20s, the poly crisis, however we want to define it, perhaps become front and center in our lives. And so just a reminder really that if we're looking to make big changes for the future, we always have to empathize with how people are feeling right now. So more on that topic. If you'd like to download the Earth Day results, there's lots of information on climate change. I put links to the other studies as well in the deck that you'll receive later. But for now, in this tradition of perhaps finding it difficult to summarize, I'll hand back to Jennifer in Milan.
Thanks, Simon. And indeed, thanks for reminding everyone that they can type questions in the chat box. I'm giving another reminder. Don't hesitate to type your questions. We will have a little Q&A at the end. And I'm going to hand over to April to talk to us about empathy in action. But I just want to say, April, that my empathy is very much in action now, because I know that you have woken up very early to join us at 5 o'clock in the morning. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Can you guys see my screen? Are we good? Okay, great. So I wanted to start by saying, listen, we are all trying to get through everything that is happening today, but I want to remind us all that every problem that we have, every business problem we have is actually a human problem, right? So let's not forget that. Every data point that we're analyzing and trying to get through is the result of the measurement of some kind of human behavior. So we have to keep that in mind as we move through all of what it is we're trying to deal with today. So I believe I am the empathy expert here at Ipsos. They call me the empathy activist. I talk about it a lot. So why now? What is happening now? Well, Simon mentioned all of the things that are going on in our world, right? The climate change, the conflict, this notion of identity, and what does that mean anymore? And also inflation, which we know is one of the big things. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into inflation in particular. But remember that these are all things that we are all dealing with in different ways and at different points in our lives. Because of that, we need to have a front row seat in the lives of human beings. We have to talk to people. We have to stay in front of them. And we have to start remembering what it is that they need and how we can help them. I believe this idea of empathy has truly expanded, though. We used to talk very much about our consumers and our customers. It has now begun to include our employees, who could be a good marketing tool for us as well, and our communities, who also will be talking about our companies, our businesses, our brands. So it's important to keep those in mind, and we're going to deal with that a little bit in what I have to say this morning. This idea of inflation, let's be clear, it has become the new pandemic. I took this picture actually in my local supermarket because I could not believe that they were trying to charge me $10 for some eggs. But this is what's happening now, and this is what people are seeing. And what does that mean to every individual? It has outpaced things like crime and violence, unemployment, poverty and social inequality, all those things important. But inflation is what is on top of mind of people. So let's talk about what that means for individuals, right? How an older person in their 70s who have lived through an inflationary period in time will be dealing with that very differently than a young guy who just got his first credit card and is trying to figure out how does he spend now. So it is important to recognize that these people are all dealing with inflation based on their life stage, based on their financial responsibilities, based on their personality, their attitudes, their mindset. But we did some work with these people, and we tried to understand what is it that that we could do, right? And you know what? Here's what was top of mind. I just want to feel valued. I want to feel like you hear me. I love this quote by one of the people in our communities. She said, it'd be nice if the people who could afford a life raft could share a corner of it as much as they can. They get that brands are in a tough spot. They understand that prices have gone up, costs have gone up for everyone. But if they get the sense that a brand or a business is empathetic, that they're relatable, that they talk to me in ways that I can understand and that I'm really dealing with, that they're loyal to their loyal customers. Treat me like I treat you and be transparent. If there's something that's hurting you as a company, if there are costs that have gone up, tell me that. Tell me that, and I can understand a little better why that's been passed on to me. And lastly, and I want to dig a little deeper into this, is how are you as an employer, right? How can we all be better employers? So I mentioned that this empathy idea has expanded to include who we are as employers. 92% of CEOs believe that their organizations are empathetic, but only 50% of employees report having empathetic CEOs. There's a disconnect here, guys. How are we going to do this? Something's not registering. There is a return on having empathy for your employees. People will stay with your organization. They'll work for longer hours. They'll even take a pay cut for an empathetic company. So how do we make sure that we do that? This is an example of a study that we did for a consulting firm. They believed that diversity was a competitive advantage. They wanted to make sure they had every voice at the decision-making table, but they recognized that there was a glass ceiling. There weren't women at their higher levels. There weren't LGBTQ representation. There weren't different ethnicities within their group. So they invited us to come in, and we did some key levers. We tried to assess, where is it that this problem is seeming to happen? Is it in the performance reviews? Is it in the training? What is the issue? And once we helped them understand that, they developed some great KPIs, and they were able to focus their efforts and make some very significant shifts. And their employees recognized that, and they recognized them as empathetic within their organization. The last thing I'm going to talk about is how empathy can impact communities. Right now, companies are thinking about what's our role in society. It used to be just about increasing profit. That is no longer the case. Right now, we are looking at how companies can help make society better. And in fact, given what people are seeing within their governments, they're looking to companies to do that. I will add that Gen Zers are not having it. They want companies to step up, to take a role in the communities that they are living in. So we finished doing some ethnography looking at this, and this is actually a woman named Farah who talked very poignantly about a drug franchise that actually opened stores in the communities where people needed to get their medication. It meant something to her, and so she talked about that very well. There's a co-op retail that's actually talking about reinvesting their advertising dollars to do community food initiatives, and it's working for them. There's a rideshare company in Georgia that, felt that people were being led away from the voting booth, and they provided free rides to people if they needed to get to vote. It's things like this that people are really looking for, and all of that, is just about empathy, right? Can we think what other people think, feel what they feel, do the things that they're doing, and sometimes limit ourselves from doing the things that they can't do? That's how we as leaders and business people can start to really have empathy for people. But all of that is in service to adding or creating value to the people that you serve. There is a return on empathy. You will retain. You will have more gut so that you'll be able to get to your insights quicker without having to ask so many questions. You'll be able to increase your numbers around advocacy. People will start to recommend you to their friends, and that's a very key KPI. And lastly, there's about creative effectiveness, whereas when you add empathy, it will actually do that. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next few minutes. So action without empathy is really meaningless, but empathy without the action behind it is directionless. So I encourage us all to include empathy in everything we do.
Great, thank you very much, April. So it's really about how we act upon empathy as well. And I was wondering, because you mentioned that you're the empathy woman at Ipsos, you're the empathy ambassador, advocate, everything. So I was wondering if you would like to share, what empathy means to you personally, if you have any example of what, of what empathy has done to you or in your life, in your experience.
So it's really interesting. I guess I used to be pretty opinionated. And what's been happening to me since I've been doing all this empathy stuff is I've started to really understand like everyone's view, right? And, I usually end at an opinion anyway, but it does help sort of get at why would someone feel the way they feel? And so things that in the past I might have totally disagreed with, now I can sort of open my mind to. My friends find it kind of annoying, to be honest, because I'm supposed to be, saying what they say, but I've started to understand people at a different level.
Okay, so maybe a new way of listening. That's what I hear.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you, April, so much for being with us again so early. And we're going to fly back to London and hand over to Gillian to take us through how empathy elevates brand success. Over to you, Gillian.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's so exciting to be here, to be talking about empathy with all these amazing colleagues of ours, especially April, our expert. And I'm humbled to be among such a great group, but also excited to be able to take the opportunity to talk about how brands elevate, how empathy can elevate brand success. You've just got a little bit of a sneak preview there. So I also started with a question. So when it comes to brands, I wondered, why empathy? Well, generally, empathy allows us as people to connect with one another by understanding different perspectives, sharing emotions, feeling compassion. We've just heard that from April and her own experience. And when it comes to brands, Well, brands are managed and marketed by people for people. So to build connections with people, marketers should understand the different needs and wants people have. They should understand the different contexts people find themselves in. And this requires empathy. So to me, it makes sense, and it made sense. And in fact, arguably one of the world's most successful brands also thought that it made sense. So back in the day, it's a while ago now, Mike McCullough joined Apple, and he understood this. In fact, he wrote a 3-point call to action for the company called the Apple Marketing Philosophy. And in his 3 points, we had empathy, focus, impute, in that order as well. So empathy was first in his call to action, and he had this to say about empathy. Apple should strive for an intimate connection with customers' feelings. We will truly understand their needs better than any other company. Now, when I came across this, it felt like there was a really great lesson in it, because here is a successful company that recognized the power of empathy, so much so that they put it first in their marketing philosophy. And it made me wonder, it really did, it made me wonder if this is what empathy meant to Apple all those years ago, what does it mean for us now? So what do we mean by empathy? So empathy is all about understanding what is important to people and how brands add to their lives. So it's a two-parter really, understanding what's important to people, which is what we saw reflected for Apple, and how brands can add to people's lives. So let's have a look at each of these in a little more detail. Understanding what's important is all about getting to grips with how people's emotions, needs, and wants change in different situations, in different contexts. This requires marketers to really listen, to really understand, and to experience the lives of others. So for instance, if a brand serves to offer people relief from pain, do marketers have a deep understanding of what it is to live with chronic pain? If a brand serves to bring fun and excitement to people, do marketers have a deep understanding of what moves people? I think there's a great example out at the moment in the Pringles hand in a can. Makes people laugh. They can recognize themselves in it. But it also requires a strong company culture and an institutional commitment to getting closer to people. We heard that from April as well. So it's quite inward looking. And we consider this empathy as an input. Now, when we think about the other side of the sentence, how brands can add to people's lives, this is empathy as an output. Empathy as an output is about delivering on what people want, need, and expect from a brand through the products they offer, the services they give, the messages that they broadcast. These are tangible and relevant actions that allow brands the opportunity to demonstrate empathy. Now, Arno and Geraldine will speak to this when they tell us all about creativity and empathy in just a few minutes. But until then, I have just one great example of a brand demonstrating empathy, and it's from Volvo. In this ad, we see how many parents feel about having a baby, absolute joy, but also the many chores of preparing and looking after a newborn, and the exhaustion that comes with it. And Volvo recognizes this. They demonstrate how the safety of their cars look after parents, like parents look after their babies. And the car literally prevents the mother falling asleep at the wheel and avoiding a truck. It's a great example of demonstrating empathy. It shows a deep understanding what new parents experience and how the car adds to their lives. And it tested well. So Volvo is clearly demonstrating they care about the same things people care about. They are also showing a connection between what the brand does, how they act, and what people care about. And this is empathy in action. So here's another illustration of empathy. In this example from the beer category in South Africa, we found in our R&D that 16% of brand choice is governed by brands being perceived as empathetic. Through campaigns focused on responsible drinking and addressing gender-based violence, two incredibly critical topics, beer brands like Carling Black Label and Heineken are perceived as empathetic. Their brand campaigns show understanding and acknowledgement of the social consequences in the category. There are visible demonstrations of sharing what people care about and acting on it. And these actions taken by the brands all contribute to the brands being chosen, because of course we want our brands to be chosen, we want our brands to be bought, but also to being perceived as having empathy. So now empathy is absolutely about understanding. This is the input of empathy. But for brands to be perceived as empathetic, they need to go deeper. Brands need to show that they share what people care about and want the best for people. And they need to be seen to act in ways that make people's lives better. These are the output of empathy. Now, data offers marketers a way to get to this deep understanding and know whether they're being perceived as empathetic. And to surface what is important and measure what matters, ask the right questions. This seems obvious, I know it seems obvious, but the quality of understanding corresponds to the qualities of the questions we ask. And by questioning ourselves and questioning others, we can surface what is important, we measure what matters. And through the lens of empathy, through understanding, sharing, acting, these two measurement principles take us beyond brands and categories to what is important in people's lives. It allows us to see if the empathy a brand demonstrates is being perceived by people. And this is how empathy elevates brand success. So what does this all mean for marketers? Well, nurture an empathy mindset to deeply understand the people your brand serves. Remember empathy as an input. Ensure you have the information you need to be able to act with empathy. This is empathy as an output, so that you can explore and fine-tune how your brand can meaningfully resonate with people and positively shape their expectations of your brand. Now, empathy does not act alone. We know that brand success comes through shaping expectations, understanding context, and acting with empathy. And if you do that in ways that truly matter to people, that connect with people, you will elevate brand success. So I started with a question, and I thought I would end with a question, a simple one, but hopefully one that gets you thinking. Here it is. How do you and your brands act with empathy?
Thank you, Gillian. That leaves us with a nice little homework for everyone on the call to do. That's great. But now it's my turn to ask you a question, as you've been asking us questions. So you've shared lots of examples, and I know that in the work that you did with lots of other colleagues in Ipsos, you've looked at tons of data and correlations and lots of different brands around the world, different categories. I was wondering if in this work that you did, there was anything that surprised you, anything that stood out particularly?
What surprised me? So you know, there are so many certainties in the world. Change is a given, change is a certainty. The future being foggy, I think, is a certainty, but progress is not. And acting with empathy offers us all a beautiful, simple way to progress. Yes, we have to do the work to get to that deep understanding, but that's really what surprised me, that empathy is a beautiful, powerful, simple way that we can all act on to make progress.
Great. Empathy for progress is a lovely quote to leave us with. Thank you very much, Gillian. And I am now going to hand over to Geraldine and Arnaud, who are going to talk about empathy and creativity. So how empathy plays with creative effectiveness. Over to you guys and girl.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. A very interesting topic. We are glad with Geraldine to speak today with you about empathy and actually how it is a key driver in driving creativity and effectiveness in advertising. We'll be referencing as well some recent ads that will illustrate our story. So we will describe them and we will share links at the end of the session for you to watch in your own time if you don't know them. But first of all, Geraldine, what can you tell us about what Ipsos knows of creativity?
Awesome. Thanks, Arnaud. So here at Ipsos, we wanted to understand what drives creative effectiveness. And for that, we analyzed more than 1,000 creatives in our COVID testing database. And after grouping together metrics that represents people's reaction, we discovered that there are 3 main themes or types of experiences related to creative effectiveness, which are published in a book called Misfits that our colleague Adam published recently, by the way. But let's briefly talk about these experiences. So the first one is a creative experience marked in red here in our brain. So an experience that entertains and surprises, that is talkable. Secondly, we have creative ideas in purple, which is more about ideas or concepts, right? So showing something new in your ad, information people didn't realize before, considering the brand as different. And then we have empathy and fitting in, which we'll talk about later. So there are many powerful learnings we extracted from this advertising experiences. And the first one is that creativity is essential to drive advertising effectiveness. And in fact, we have robust evidence that a clear component of creativity is a mindset of actively not wanting to fit in or be a misfit, differentiating your brand from the others. And we know that, for example, these types of non-conforming creative campaigns are much better at getting attention for the brand, right or no?
Yes, totally right. Creativity is essential. Yet, what we have found out as well, that to the regular people, even the most creative ads are sometimes not working exactly the way the brands want. So, for example, ads can be very creative but confusing for some. Like, for example, the aptly named More Confusing Times ad from Burger King. It shows people getting confused with modern times contradictions, like ordering an environment-friendly appliance, but which is delivered from the other side of the world with a huge carbon footprint, or eating chicken nuggets without any chicken in it. And through that ad, some people just don't get that message of confusion and are actually confused. Or ads that are clearly creative and captivating, but which are polarizing, like the Samsung Spider, whose eyes look like the new Samsung Galaxy camera module, yet which can be disgusting and off-putting for some who are in fear of spiders. Or that piece of creative from Penny that hit us 2 Christmas ago, which does touch on parents' tensions of how teenagers have missed out in socializing and experiencing due to COVID. So clearly expressing that challenge, but not really clearly expressing how the brand can act upon it, as Gillian and April were advising us. So, Geraldine, another question to you. Is it possible to have the best of both worlds, to be creative and resonate with people at the same time and be empathetic?
Such a good question. But fortunately, it is possible. And not only you can, but this is a must-have. Empathy is an essential dimension of creative effectiveness. And here we go back to our misfits brain. The third advertising experience is empathy and fitting in. But what does this mean? So it means creating advertising that represents the people that you want to appeal to, framing the stories of the messages in their role, their dreams, their challenges, and representing how your brand can fit into that.
Yes, and in fact, we have seen that ads that are both empathetic and creative will have a much stronger impact on creative effectiveness. When you look at that magic combination, you can see here that you can get up to 20% extra power in creative effectiveness. And looking at the current context, these times of polycrisis, empathy is even more important. We see that drivers such as, for people like me, being relatable are much stronger with the crisis being amplified. So now let's speak together about an ad and see whether you think it is both creative and empathetic. And the ad we would like to speak about is the latest ad from Belvedere, a vodka brand starring Daniel Craig. So let me tell you the story of the ad. It opens on a title that says that Daniel Craig will be starring as himself, and we see Daniel Craig in his expected style, classy suit, with paparazzis, enter a car, and then completely change himself. going for an unexpected, totally wild style and grunge, rock and roll behavior, going crazy in that posh Paris hotel, dancing over Rita Ora song in very sexy moves on the rooftop and at the swimming pool. To finish, by having him serving himself a glass of Belvedere vodka, with the director of the ad telling him cut and that he's going to start again and asking Daniel to be himself. So here is a question that I would like to ask you now. Would you say that his ad from Belvedere is empty, as some marketing commentators have said, or on the contrary, is full of empathy? Please have a thought about it, and we'll reloop about it later. And if you want, you can use the chat to share with us your point of view on that piece of creative.
Such an interesting ad. But before we give you our take on it, we're going to share 3 ways in how advertising can trigger empathy with people. After analyzing several top performing ads, we've seen that there are different possible routes to empathy. So the first one is using the power of context. Then you could also address attention or struggle in people's lives, or you could also shape people's expectations. So let's talk about this more in detail. So let's first talk about context. And for that, we'll use an ad from Heineken as an example. And this ad starts by portraying a context of a home party, particularly popular during COVID times, we all know that, where everyone is trying to take care of their drinks and keep track of it, but there's a problem. Sometimes you just can't remember where you put your drink. And later on in the ad, we see that people start solving this issue by identifying or labeling their Heineken bottle in any way. So using a scrunchie or even writing their names directly. So this is a great example of embracing the context that we were in and we're currently in, and not being afraid to portray it. And in this case, this was all about the new normal of socializing. And this ad had tremendously good results in terms of creative profile. It's entertaining, fun, perceived as different. And especially, it's a great fit for empathy. It reflects people's context, stays true to reality, and fits with Heineken's image. Another possible path to empathy is by demonstrating tension or portraying honest struggles of people's lives. And in this case, we can see it clearly in an ad from Invisalign, a clear teeth straightener brand. And it shows the mom curiously looking at her daughters and noticing how easily things are working for her with the help of technology. So invisible braces, automatic windows, this just wasn't her experience when she was her age at all. So the ad finishes with a great tagline of the brand saying, Invisalign, not your parents' braces, with a throwback scene of the mom struggling during her teenage years. So this ad not only scores great on empathy if we go back to our Misfits brain, but it also shows how the brand is saying, I get you, I know the struggles you've been through, and with me, your kids won't have to suffer like you did. And last but not least, we have expectations. And when you depict people's expected behavior with a product, you truly show how well you know your target and the relationship they have with your brand. And in this ad from Pringles, we see a typical problem with their packaging sometimes. So to reach the last stack of chips, there's some risk. Your hand could get stuck. So this is exactly what happens to the main character in this ad. And throughout the creative, we see how Pringles takes this opportunity, embraces this fact, and depicts the main character living key moments of his life with the Pringles can stuck on his arm. So another fun and unique approach on how you can show empathy with people. So far we've seen 3 possible ways to connect and show empathy. So your brand doesn't have to talk about sensible society issues to achieve that, as you've just seen with the 3 cases shown. So really the takeaway here is there's no excuse for not showing empathy. So going back to our little game. So is Belvedere, after looking at this, empathy or demonstrating empathy? So Arnaud, what is our take?
Thanks, Geraldine. Well, the answer, at least for us, is, and for people, is that surprisingly, maybe for you, it's not only creative, but also full of empathy. And we have three main reasons why. It plays on context of people. You know, it plays at a time of polycrisis in the world where everything is uncertain, inflation, politics, your role in society, even your own identity, as April, you were mentioning. It highlights a key tension. Can you be happy and enjoy yourself for a while when the world is in crisis, when your personal life is full of constraints and pressure? And it meets the aspirations and expectations of people for a little bit of oblivion, of escapism, a release from these tensions by giving them some time out to be themselves and to have a bit of time out, a bit of fun. It does play on these three dimensions, and it is a super successful Misfit Hat. So clearly, mission accomplished, not only being very relatable by playing on all these tensions, but also being very creative.
That is right. So in a nutshell, here's what I get from today. First of all, nurture creativity because we know it's key for advertising effectiveness, but make sure you trigger empathy while doing it. So leverage people's context, tensions in their lives, or shape their expectations to build true misfits, as Arnav says, unique, different, and effective creative advertising.
Great, thank you so much for these for this great story and these great examples. And one thing that sort of is underlying, I think, in terms of thinking about what everything that you've shown is the cultural dimension of empathy and showing empathy. It seems that this is something that could change, like from one cultural context to another, like from one country to another. And Geraldine, you're very well placed to talk about this topic because you're Venezuelan, living in Barcelona, working in English, but in a French company, so you have lots of these components. And of course, we often see advertising that is intended to travel. So how does that work when we think about empathy and different, different countries, different cultures?
Yeah, that is such a good question, Jennifer. To illustrate this, we always like to talk about a study we did with Babbel. So it's a language learning app. And we understood that learning a language, for example, means something different depending on the country that you're in. So in Germany, we found that it's related with personal enrichment. But in Brazil, if you look at the LATAM context, learning a new language meant something different, which was learning new skills to potentially get a boost in their career. So our humble advice is to encourage brands to do research, to have a total understanding of people, and even more if the advertising is meant to be related or at least in different countries. Or at least, we encourage brands to ask themselves, is it reflecting the world of the people we're trying to appeal to, their challenges or dreams? How does my brand fit into that, right? So these are some questions that should help to keep the focus on people and achieve empathy across cultures.
Okay. Yeah, so the example you gave is clearly one where if you really want to be empathetic, you have to understand the different meanings that something has in different countries. Arnaud, I see you're nodding, so you agree with what Geraldine has shared.
Yeah, definitely. No, just to add that you can find insights and ideas that can travel across cultures, definitely. And Babbel, they had an idea at the heart, which was traveling. But understanding the nuances, as Geraldine, you flagged, is essential. And it was essential for the campaign to be effective in all capturing all the local nuances that we uncovered.
Great, thank you very much for adding that perspective. And now we're going to open up for a few minutes of Q&A. So Simon, I know that you have been looking at the chat box and
I have indeed, yes.
Studying the questions from our audience. So I'm going to hand over to you so that you can pass over some of those questions to our speakers.
Absolutely, no, thank you. And I'm still getting some things through on the Belvedere point, including someone who really likes it, but perhaps observing that maybe in doing something like that, it could also be that we have a brand in the UK called Marmite that you love or you hate. Is there a risk, Arnaud, that if you're you might end up with something that's completely polarizing by empathizing so well with one group, and actually it's counterproductive to the real group I need to be in touch with.
Oh, that's definitely something that we've seen happening in the history of advertising. I think like it's a bit like good fat or bad fat. If you allow me the analogy, is that you have good polarization, you know, raising interest in the end to the benefit of the group that you want to speak and connect with. And you can think about Nike Dream Crazy. And sometimes on the other side, being polarizing in the negative sense and getting the haters or the people who are upset, you know, clearly damaging your purpose, your brand, your business. So you need to be very full of understanding about, you know, these groups and how you can sometimes polarize people. In the case of Belvedere, it seems that it's on the good polarization side of things.
Okay, lovely. No, lovely. Thank you. Well, we're going to, and I've got a question now for April, but I think Julian, you might want to pick up on this as well. So, April, question here really is understanding you are empathy expert and ambassador. What distinguishes empathy from good old-fashioned deep customer understanding and customer insight to help me, you know, build something better and build something different? What's that special, you know, thing that takes us forward?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's not that different, right? This is just what we've always learned to do. What's been different from what I've seen is this ability to truly step within someone else's perspective, to see the world through someone else's eyes. That's sort of like an evolution of what we used to talk about. We used to try to understand and talk about see, but now it's about really getting in that space and living it and feeling it. I think that's very different.
And perhaps
I think it's something also, if I may, Simon, it's a bit like taking, you know, research results away from the boardroom and making them, you know, insights that really live within the organizations, that there is something that is much more lived than just sort of analyzed coldly. And there's ways to do that, right? To live more.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think that sort of brings us, perhaps, Gillian, you were reminding us that we may need to think about how we measure things in perhaps a slightly different way if we're going to get closer.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. That's, you know, ask the right questions. I think, and in the measurement, it is about, okay, getting that deep understanding, which is what April was saying, and Jennifer, yes, absolutely. It's about going, you know, thinking about your organization as well. That's kind of the input of empathy. But if we can then have that understanding, and I think for me, in terms of, you know, what the measurement needs to be able to give us is to say, okay, now how do we understand that context? Is the measurement helping us to understand the context in which people are living? And what does that mean for how brands can act in ways that are meaningful for them? So I think in terms of what's different now, because yes, it is customer centricity, it's about bringing in the notion of context, which and really bringing it in and taking into account, which also would reflect in the advertising. And it's about brands actually doing something about it now and being seen to do something about it in ways that are meaningful. And then our measurement needs to be able to capture that, but then also help to inform it.
Well, this point about context is resonating actually, and it's coming through in the questions, and it brings me to Arnaud, because we've got a question about France actually, and I do remember when you were on the key stage before, when you were talking about cultural transferability, and I think you had an example of adverts that worked well in the US, not so well, by the way, in Britain, where we speak a similar language, but were working well in France. And I just, any thoughts on that, just to help us navigate some of the different markets we may be invited or having to work with? Because it's, you know, clearly, if you're spending big budgets on some of these campaigns, you really need to know what this local market is going to respond to.
Yeah.
Like, are stereotypes true or not?
So Yes and no, because stereotypes are also meant to be discussed as well. And it's true that, you know, if we look at a macro level, that we do see that ads transferring very well or quite well from the US to France. It all depends on the context of the brand, the category, because the history of the brand that you are looking at may be completely different in one market versus another, with completely different references. The context of the category may be completely different as well, the drivers for people and the context of people. And as you mentioned, you know, the context of society, of the world, of the communities that people are living in. So the best way that a researcher can answer that question is to say, well, you know, you need to have that understanding. You need to lead with empathy, as April, you were saying, or Gillian, you know, understanding, you know, the particular context of people, the macro forces and the macro trends at play within people's lives, in order to best figure out how you can transfer marketing actions or advertising to the best from one country to another. And we're of course very happy to help with that.
Absolutely, I know you are. You're always absolutely on top of sort of the changes that we're seeing. But just on that point, I might just quickly move to Geraldine, if I may. And in your presentation, you had talked about non-conforming campaigns. Now, you know, we've all watched things like Mad Men and sort of over the years, I've got this sense of creative people producing these interesting ads. Do they know what they're doing when they're creating these ads, and we find out that they're empathetic later, or are they actually following some clear and explicit rules to be able to get the success that you've shared with us today? So
that was for, who were you asking the question?
For Geraldine.
Still 2020, sorry. But no, I was just saying that this is a great question, because at the end, all of these brands that we just saw, all of these creatives, and the big idea behind it is rooted in consumer insights, and it's rooted in the people's behavior, expected behavior with the product. Just as we saw with the Pringles can, we completely know that is a problem. Of course, they exaggerated in the creative, but I think it is a great point to truly understand people, just as April was saying earlier in the creative. But not only that, but also how your brand can help into that. How does your brand fit into that context? Not only showing empathy, but also integrated it with your brand purpose and how you can help in that.
Thank you. And I'm going to pick up on that point about purpose to go to April, because one of the things we've got in the chat that stood out, April, from one of our colleagues on the call, was about this. I think it was 50% of only 50% of CEOs have empathy, and actually a follow-up question we've got is, you know, I think many colleagues and clients watching will know that, you know, these international organizations are quite complex as well. Is there anything that advice that you can give to us if we're working in a complex organization to perhaps encourage the empathetic, let's say, vibe or actions that you've been sharing with us today?
Yeah, I mean, it's about asking the questions. It's about really being curious, right? Being curious about who your people are, what are they experiencing, what's happening in their lives, and showing that. I thought the example of the company that said, you know, we're shifting our advertising dollars to do something within the community. And they talked about that, right? They did it, which was great. Yeah. But they made it very obvious that this is something that they were making a very intentional change to do. So I think it's about, you know, really understanding, listening, being curious about what people are feeling. But then when you do something about it, talk about it. Let people see that it works, because it needs to match with who you are as a company or as a leader, quite frankly. Okay,
so keep the conversation going and sharing and actually ensuring it resonates where it needs to resonate. Well, yeah, thank you, everybody. Yeah. Sorry, keep going, April. Sorry.
No, I was just saying, talk about it. Talk about what you're doing when it's.
Lovely. Well, actually, well, all this talking about empathy has definitely inspired many people on who are watching today, because I've got many more that we could go, but we're nearly out of time. So we will reply to your questions that you kindly put in the chat box, and so we'll follow up, and we'll be sharing the presentations, of course, with everybody. But for now, I'll hand back to Jennifer just to close the webinar, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Lots of great questions. Yes, so we will definitely come back. Also questions on KPIs and how we measure the effects of empathy. And so lovely, lovely questions. So I just have to thank everyone for, of course, our great speakers and everyone on the call for being with us today. And I need to just give you an appointment for next time. Our next KEYS webinar will be on June the 8th, and we will be talking about the ESG imperative: people, planet, and prosperity. And with that, I will say goodbye to you all, and thank you very much again. Bye.
Bye.